Hey guys, I'm here, but thought for this next discussion session, maybe we just stare at the fire, because the fire is actually a beautiful metaphor for what God intends to do in a man's life and what is absolutely intended for a man's life. I want to read to you first what God told Jeremiah his purpose was. This is from Jeremiah chapter 1, verse 9 and 10. Behold, I've put my words in your mouth. See, I have this day set you over the nations and over the kingdoms, to root out and pull down, to destroy and to throw down, to build and to plant. A man is a glorious thing. A man in his full glory is meant to be a source of great energy to the world. Think of Adam in the Garden of Eden, taking the glory that God had given him in partnership with God and receiving instruction in the garden day by day, receiving the intimate knowledge and wisdom that was required for the next day's work. And you didn't see Adam in the beginning operating in the false self. He was operating in the true self, which required that he receive from God everything that he didn't possess himself, instead of going and acquiring it himself. I love just the picture of this fire, the idea that something has grown, but its ultimate purpose is to bring light and to bring heat, but it's got to be destroyed. It basically has to fade away. And what the world is in desperate need of is men who are allowing themselves to metaphorically be able to, be burned, so that God's light and God's heat through them can give to the world what it needs. So what happens in a man's life? So far in our journey, we've talked about, that we're created in God's image with his desires. Why? Because they're required in a larger story, which is a clash between a couple of kingdoms. And that identity or that image of us gets compromised because we actually choose a much lesser image of him, one that's not rooted and founded in him, but one where we go off and we utilize our own strategies, and eventually we come to the end of ourselves, hopefully, by grace. And why did we start on that journey apart from God in the first place? It's because we were wounded, and we came up with a strategy that we felt would keep us protected. And so now, having addressed the fact that we are wounded and that we do come up with strategies on our own, so what happens then? Because it's easy to acknowledge and have some clarity on that, and many Christians stop right there. That is where they plateau. I'm broken. I know it. I need the grace of God. I need to start shaping up and producing fruit like better behavior. But my question is, how many Christian men, or men who will identify themselves as Christians, how many of them offer what this fire is offering right now to the rest of the world? Many of them honestly never go beyond what looks like dead wood. And they would acknowledge, I'm just dead wood. I'm just a sinner saved by grace. And man, there's just no life in that. I don't want that. And I know that you don't want that. Otherwise, you wouldn't have shown up to basic. What we want is more. But here is what's required for us to grow beyond that and start offering life, is that we have to go back to square one. It's not enough just to have the old self torn down. We actually have to ask God to come in and start telling us, why did you make me? What portions of my story were actually meant to become this, so that other people then can come and see you and enjoy you, and I can share my story and they can see themselves in it. We have a new identity that apart from Christ, who did precisely this thing right here, he allowed himself to become a burnt offering like was offered for thousands of years prior to him, so that the world could come and live with him again. So what we need from God is a new identity, and that requires the old us be crucified and something new be born again. But where do we get that identity? Do we have to reproduce it again? Do we just take kind of the best parts of what we did in the past? No. It actually requires that God speaks into it. We have a true identity, one that in Ephesians and in Psalm 139 is referred to when God says, I knew you before the foundations of the earth. I knit you together in your mother's womb. The pressure is actually off. We don't have to figure out how to make life work. We don't have to search and find the answer to the greatest question that plagues men. Who am I? What am I made for? What's my purpose? How do I leave a lasting mark in the world? God's actually had that figured out even before he made you, and we were shaped together to accomplish that, as our stories have actually been shaped, because God's been there the whole time. So we simply need to rest in him. We need to dismantle the false self by taking every evidence of the poser in the wound to him and just saying, I need your interpretation of this. I need healing in these areas. And we do that by hanging out with the right people. We do it by having discussions that help us understand our story. And as clarity comes, and as we are around people who have gone through stories similar to ours, the healing actually begins. And it makes room and it makes space. Just like Jeremiah was told by God, you got to tear stuff down to make room for the other stuff to come in, because you can't be clinging to the false self and clinging to your wounds from which we've gained our identity most of our lives, and then, side by side with that, begin to receive the portions that God has for us. One of them has to be deconstructed, and then in that place, God can speak into it. And at boot camp, we gave you guys the opportunity, along with tons of scripture, to just show you that this is just how God works. So I'm curious, what have you done with that? If you did receive a new name from the Lord, a new identity or a hint or a clue, what have you done with it? Have you meditated on it? Have you continued to ask God? That was the beginning of a treasure hunt. He gave you a map, and whether you got a name or whether you didn't get a name but you desired a name,